Namaskar, madam. Welcome on behalf of Indica, on behalf of the conference. A very warm welcome and thank you so much for agreeing to join us.
Namaskar, Sumedha ji. My apologies, I ran 5 minutes late. There was another VC which ran late.
No apologies needed, madam. We are absolutely eager to listen to you. And it's wonderful that someone like you is joining us for this conference on women in Hinduism. It is absolutely wonderful for us. So thank you again for being here. And you wanted to have a discussion with all of us. So may I kick off the discussion with a question?
Ji.
So, ma'am, what we are doing in this conference is to rethink the whole concept of women, womanhood, feminism, femininity as it exists today. So, would you agree with us that this is the need of the hour, that the Western understanding of feminism has to be replaced by Indian understanding of what it means to be a woman?
I think that this whole controversy around the terminology feminism is an indication of a desire to split humanism. So when somebody introduces me as a feminist, I take strong objection to it. Because in our culture, in our religion, which is Sanatan Dharma, we pay respect and homage to every living and non-living being. We do not restrict ourselves to a particular gender. We do not restrict ourselves to a particular region. When we speak about Kalyan, we speak about Sansarka Vishwaka Kalyan. So should we look at ourselves as only from the limited prism of feminism is my question. Exactly. Many a times we are so eager to conform or for that matter confront a Western thought. We do not realize that it takes us away from the whole that we are already.
Yes, indeed.
So when somebody says, are you a feminist? I object to it and I say, I'm a humanist. Because when it comes to, let's say, a feminist ideology, or for that matter, a dialogue or a deliberation, there is also a presumption that it would be done by women for women. And I am of the belief that our religion, our community, or our civilization has not been limited in thought. That only a woman can think of the upliftment or emancipation of a woman, and a man cannot. I think that itself is prejudicial. So I am not running a race with the Western world. I am content to discover and rediscover elements of my own civilization, which need to be brought forth through dialogue for the world to deliberate upon or reflect upon.
So, ma'am, then you will be happy to know that our chief curator is Professor Paturi, and I am just a co-curator. So we have a very good place for men in this conference on women in femininity in Hinduism, and we have a number of gentlemen presenters also of papers. So we are trying to, of course, make it a very holistic approach, as you said, a humanist approach. So, ma'am, when we have to perforce pit ourselves against the Western narrative, especially in academics, because that is the accepted one. Anytime we say anything, we are shot down on the basis of certain theoretical constructs which are made by Western academicians and which have a lot of power. So a lot of us here who are in this field are struggling to put forth our own narrative. That is why this conference has been organized, so that we can change the terms of engagement. So, ma'am, do you think that we should go back to read our original sources in the original languages, our Indic languages, Sanskrit, Tamil, Malayalam, Hindi, Odia, all Indian Indic languages, and then reconsider holistic work?
There is a global acceptance that academic branches like sociology, anthropology, or for that matter, even modern scientific evidence-based interpretation of academics around issues like criminology, those emanate from the Western world. there is now a disquiet and a grudging acceptance in the Western world that things of academic interest from Asia, Southeast Asia, have never found a voice on the international platform. We need to leverage that disquietude and produce empirical evidence so that we can juxtaposition the thought that they profess and show that this thought, this way of life existed much before they presented a theory on it in the Western world. So when we seek an engagement, we need to seek an engagement from an empirically evidenced position. We understand that our cultural context has not resonated in academic circles because they want evidence-based engagement. For instance, we today have a huge potential for Ayurveda. Now, one of the greatest challenges that is confronting women and children in our country, especially young girls, is anemia. Now, one solution professed or projected by the pharmaceutical companies, or for that matter, even the health ecosystems in our country, iron ki ek goli de do. So in my department, we experimented with Ayush to ensure in the state of Karnataka that if we take the traditional path, can we meet the challenge of anemia? Now, we've seen evidence that anemia reduced with the use of traditional concepts by 50%.
Amazing.
And now we are having the ICMR and other medical organizations evidence this and present a paper in medical journals. So that one, there is now ample evidence from traditional methodologies and its impact on modern health systems. And the fact that these medical journals are areas where we did not indulge in earlier. So my position is that if we are to talk about feminism in our civilization, let's do it on the basis of empirical evidence and not restrict ourselves to rhetoric.
Yes, yes. Exactly, ma'am. Thank you so much for saying that, because that is exactly what we at Indica are pushing to do. That is exactly what this conference is about. We want to present evidence-based theoretical models which have come out of our own lived experience as Hindu women. And your emphasis on creating proper models, theories with evidence is very, very welcome. That's exactly what we're trying to do. I would just like to ask one question about this. Do you think that in this whole plethora of evidence that we have, we can include folk traditions and oral traditions? Because in this conference and in Indica, we do also place some emphasis on folk traditions as markers of the social, religious, civil position of women and the way they operate in society. So should we look at oral traditions and folk traditions?
I think that apart from evidencing oral and folk tradition, we also need to be very aggressive in preserving them. Because if you look at the Western context with which they explore our folk or traditional or curate our folk or traditional tales or methodologies, they put their own context to it to ensure that it is sexualized when it comes to women. And then they link it to their own liberal way of looking at women. I think that apart from producing evidence with regards to our folk or oral methodologies, while we are working on preserving them, we have a three-pronged impact. One, there is a preservation of that way of life, which includes its culture, its language, its community impact. Secondly, when we assimilate all these cultural or oral traditions, we create a larger repository, not only for our country, but also for the world to look into. And thirdly, this becomes then what I call a cultural dharohar for us to give our children. So if we tie in these three engagements with the folk and the oral traditions, we do a great service to our civilization and to our democracy.
I'm so happy to hear you saying that, ma'am, because at Indica, protection and preservation are two of the main things that we work with, and that's part of the whole thrust of what we do and this conference also. So, ma'am, how do we counteract the harmful influence of the kind of toxic feminist discourse? Not the positive one, because there are some positive parts of, but there is a toxic feminist discourse which is anti-family, anti-men, anti-society, anti-everything. By the day, it is getting more radical and more toxic. What can we do as people here? All of us are interested in it, and you are a union minister for the welfare of women. So, what do you think we can do to
Firstly, our dharma or our way of life teaches us not to get too swayed by toxicity, not to get overwhelmed by it. I think it would be extremely interesting for those who are gathered to look at Gloria Steinem's position in the 80s, late 80s or 90s for that matter, when she regretted the form of feminism she had spoken about to begin with. That Gloria Steinem herself accepted that family is of value, that an individual, man or woman, does not grow without the family values or the basic social structure that we civilizationally have always spoken about. I think if you start reflecting on Gloria Steinem's post-feminist positions, that would be of great interest. Because everybody that you speak of speaks about the glass ceiling that is to be broken. And that itself is a Western concept. Now, let me contextualize it for you. What, according to them, is feminism? According to them, feminism is taking an equal part in decision making, and especially equal part in decision making when you get married. They look at marriage as a source of subjugation. We look at marriage as a partnership. So if you look at the Saptapadi, what are the promises that a man and a woman make to each other in the presence of families and society at large? That no decision will be individual, that it would be a partnered decision. How does the marriage get solemnized? Everybody looks at कि सिंदूर लगा दिया, मंगलसूत्र पहना दिया, बंधन में बांध दिया. But if you look at the ritual of Saptapadi, there is the Hasta Milap, which is the sanctified handshake between a man and a woman in the presence of families. लेकिन उस हस्त मिलाप पे भी आशीर्वाद रूपी एक कपड़ा होता है, which is indicative of what? कि एक आदमी एक औरत हस्त मिलाप करके एक नए जीवन की शुरुआत कर रहे हैं. But between them, the solemn promise of marriage also is to be a private promise, also is to be a promise of being together, though in front of the world, but at the same time live with dignity with each other. So there is a lot of symbolism in the way a relationship begins in our society. So if you only research Saptapadi, you will indicate with empirical evidence to the world that decision making and partnership is the very foundation of our family systems.
Ma'am, these insights are so interesting and fascinating. Maybe, maybe you could tell us more of some of the examples that you think of our Indian society, which we should broadcast to the world. This is one. Some other positive examples which we live every day, and perhaps we don't think about it so much, and we don't realize how positive it actually is.
Let me give you another example. People say that feminism means speaking out and having your voice heard. When they contextualize it with our Hindu dharma, they say that आपके यहाँ पे औरतों को बोलने नहीं दिया जाता. अपनी बात रखने नहीं दिया जाता. If you look at historically, the Shastrartha that Shankaracharya ji did in the court of Kashi Naresh, there was Mandan Mishra who lost. And then his wife stood up in an open sabha and said that I am his wife, and by that virtue, till I do not lose, my husband's loss is not complete. And then she does Shastrartha with Shankaracharya. What is it indicative of? Nobody in the court of Kashi Naresh dissuaded her, reprimanded her, or denied her a Shastrartha with Shankaracharya. Shankaracharya himself indulged in Shastrartha with this lady, giving an indication that our sages, saints, and community at large was quite accustomed to having women speak up, listening to women respectfully, and then engaging with them in a debate. Nobody speaks about it.
Very true. And the example of Gargi and Yagyavalkya is also there. That is very true.
I'm saying that we sanctify Gargi, Maitri, Lopamudra. This is a normal Shastrartha, which means that you need not have been a saint. You need not have been a sage. A normal woman could have engaged in this verbal discourse in the court of a king. Now, another example. We have seen the wars of independence across the world against colonial powers such as the British. Ours is the only country where a woman tied a child to her back, got onto a horse, took out a sword against the British Raj, and had men follow her. She led in battle. So when we talk about Jhansi Ki Rani, recognize how do you position it in contrast with a modern working woman who does not let go of her child when she confronts challenges at the workplace.
That is true.
She takes that child and the child's responsibility along. Now, let me give you another example. They say women in our country never get to lead. And when they look at Ahilya Bai Holkar, they only see the shivling in her hand and say, इन्होंने बनारस की घाट में काम किया था और शिवालय की स्थापना की थी. So if you want to present empirical evidence, प्रशासनिक कौशल एक हिंदू रानी का क्या था, उसका सबसे बेहतरीन उदाहरण अहिल्याबाई होलकर है. But if you look back, Draupadi, everybody talks about how this one lady was married to 5 Pandav. Nobody talks about how she looked after the administration of the Pandav Mahal, of the Pandav kingdom. So if these remnants of administrative prowess, decision-making capacity, engaging in debate and discourse, if we bring about these examples, contextualize it with evidence, then I think you can spread out the Indian perspective with regards to women. And I do not want to engage in the term feminism. For instance, when you talk about man and woman, we always talk about Shiv and Shakti. We talk about Ardhanarishwar. Let's contextualize it with other communities, other religions, with all due respect. हमारे धर्म में कहते हैं शिव और शक्ति अर्धनारीश्वर के रूप में साथ आते हैं सृष्टि की रचना के लिए. कई और समुदायों में महिला और पुरुष संग आते हैं संभोग की दृष्टि से, ऐसा माना जाता है. कि महिला है तो डिस्ट्रैक्शन है। हमारे धर्म में कहते हैं महिला है तो सृष्टि को रचती है। इसका मतलब हम सम्मान की उपाधि देते हैं, रचना की उपाधि देते हैं, उसको ऑब्जेक्टिफाई नहीं करते। एंड लास्टली, व्हेन इट कम्स टू राइट्स ऑफ विमेन, लोग कहते हैं कि वो जो फेमिनिस्ट हैं उन्होंने ही संकल्पना की विमेन्स राइट्स। जिसने अर्थशास्त्र पढ़ा है उसमें एक छंद है। चाणक्य की क्या नीति थी कि अगर महिला घर से काम कर रही है और महिला को उस काम के लिए, उस मेहनत के लिए अगर राजा को कोई प्रतिनिधि पैसे देने जाता है और तब महिला के साथ दुस्साहस करता है तो उस प्रशासन के प्रतिनिधि को क्या दंड मिलेगा, वो भी अर्थशास्त्र में लिखित है। नाउ इमेजिन, अर्थशास्त्र कितने वर्षों पुराना है और सेक्सुअल हैरेसमेंट एट वर्क प्लेस का बिल 2013 में आया। तो इसका मतलब, if we start looking at our own texts and then contextualize it, what does feminism mean for the Western world, and start giving historically evidenced facts, you will find that much has been known about India but swept under the carpet. It is time to pull off the rug under the feet of those who have denied us respect for our civilization and for our way of life.
And those words are very inspiring. And I'm so happy to report that so many of the themes that you are talking about are being considered in this conference. We have a special section on Ardhanarishwar, for example. And so many of the things you talked about, evidence-based presentations, they are going to be there in the conference. I myself do a lot of work on the Arthashastra and have extracted a lot of the opinions that Kautilya had on women, and which are absolutely astonishing. As you said, they are very old but very modern. Ma'am, lastly, I would like to ask you that you are a role model for modern women of India today. So we would like to hear from you some advice, some of your experiences from which you learned, and what you could tell us about what you learned, what advice you have for us.
I don't think women or men in our country need advice. And especially those who have come together in Indica, they don't need advice.
Some experiences, ma'am. Some experiences, ma'am. It's always wonderful to learn from experiences.
I will only say this. I indulge in a lot of reading, which is current, in the sociological discourse across the world. I think when I appeal to you to contextualize, I do so because I recognize that evidence can only be met by evidence and then a discourse or a narrative be created. हिंदी में बहुत पुरानी कहावत है, जंगल में मोर नाचा किसने देखा। हम कब तक अपने देश में नैरेटिव और डिस्कोर्स की बात करते रहेंगे? वक्त आया है कि बाहर जाकर बताओ कि हम क्या करते हैं, क्यों करते हैं, कैसे रहते हैं और आगे भी हमारा क्या संकल्प। Which means that if you start listing those platforms where the Indian or Indica voice needs to be heard, that should be your new sankalp. ये मोर जंगल में हिंदुस्तान की सिर्फ सीमित ना रहे, विश्व पटल पर नाचे, ये मेरी अभिलाषा है।
Thank you, ma'am, and I hope we can get some help from your some help for doing this, because this is indeed the tough ask. This is the tough part of what we are doing, how to make ourselves heard. This is an attempt, and we will continue to make many more attempts. Help would be very much appreciated. If
when my ministry runs the nutrition program, my ministry is limited to running one-stop centers in collaboration with state governments. But I am at your service anytime you call upon me.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for the wonderful words, for the knowledge that you have exhibited about our past, for encouraging us. And thank you for coming to give this conference a wonderful start. Namaskar.
Thank you.